Welcome to our 18th podcast. Today we'll be talking about bad leadership and how you can make a bad situation better. And what's the one thing you can do now to improve a bad leadership situation? Keep listening to find out. Welcome to Harmonious Workplaces, a podcast about corporate culture, organizational change management, and workplace behavior. Harmonious Workplaces was started by independent consultants Rich Cruz, Ben Kleinman, and Cheryl Volpe to explore, challenge, and build on various organizational culture and change management concepts. It's a blend of theory and practice based on their personal and professional experiences working with companies of all sizes across various industries. If you own a business, lead a team, want new ideas about the corporate environment, or just want to listen to a group of consultants talking about how to make work more enjoyable, we invite you to sit back, relax, and dive in with us to Harmonious Workplaces. Hello, Harmonious Workplaces listeners. As always, we're glad to have you here with us today. I'm Rich Cruz, and I'm joined by my colleague, Cheryl Volpe.
Hi, Rich. Hi, everyone. Hey, Ben.
Hey. And Ben Kleinman. Hi, Ben.
Hey, everyone.
Just Ben. And we're, if anybody see Barbie, you know. And so today we're going to be talking about, let me preface this by saying, in the previous episodes, we've been talking about leadership, right? And so we've talked about leadership in crisis. We've talked about leadership in calm. We've talked about different forms of leadership. But what about when you get a bad leader, right? Now, what does that mean? What do you do about it? And that's what we thought we would talk about today. So who wants to start this one off?
Oh, I do.
Hey, all right.
So
I thought you would.
I do.
For sure.
So we've all been there, right? All of us have been either in that position where we know that the ship is not exactly being directed by the most competent or open or experienced leader, right?
Sure.
There are at least 5 different categories that most of us are familiar with. I think the micromanager is probably one of the easiest to identify. However, this might just be a matter of attitude. It might not really be a micromanager. It's just someone who really thinks that they have the best way to go about something, right? And some of that is on us when we think that this is a micromanager, and it's really just us thinking we have a better idea and not feeling comfortable speaking to it, right? But and it's definitely one version. Another one is the authoritarian, who absolutely my way or the highway.
There's a difference there, right? There's authoritative, and then there's authoritarian, right? And that's the one you got to watch.
You're right. Absolutely right. Yeah.
Yeah, because one can inspire confidence if someone is giving you that authoritative answer, like, absolutely, yes, we should do this. I have your back. Or there's budget, let's go. Versus authoritarian, which is, this is what we're doing. Don't ask me any questions. Do not ever question my leadership. I will crush your will to live, kind of thing. And those are, like you say, very, very different.
Right. And then we have the passive aggressive leader, right? Who is, well, you know, if that's what you want to do, kind of thing. You've got all the freedom to do that, but then you don't really have that freedom to do that, right?
Yeah.
And we already talked about
it's on you.
Yeah, it's on you. I had nothing to do with that. Yes.
And this can, I know you're in the middle of our list, Cheryl, but I feel like sometimes the passive aggressive leadership style can be almost the most insidious, because sometimes you never know what you're going to get. Whereas if you have someone who's a micromanager or authoritarian, you pretty much know they're always going to behave that way. So you can start to figure out how to work with that, through that, around that. But with passive aggressive, sometimes it's much harder to see when that's going to come to the fore and when it's going to recede. And so you're never really sure what you're getting. And you're sort of in these situations, at least where I've seen it, where you have someone who's publicly saying, yep, we're good, we're all good. And then as soon as that meeting is over, it's like a totally different story. Like that meeting never happened. and you're left wondering, what?
Yeah.
Is it just me?
Sure.
What happened?
Right. And that unpredictability, that inconsistency really can put you on edge over time. Right.
Talk about stress. I mean, there were, going way back, there were all those experiments about lab rats being given electrical stimulation in a bad way. And the ones that were given predictable had much less stress than the ones that were given unpredictable e-stim or shocks. And so it's like that unknown is just so much more devastating to our internal psyche and our stress level. And that psychological safety is just destroyed.
Right. Right.
For sure.
As you were.
I just wanted to mention one other thing for a person who is self-aware and has any training in emotional intelligence and all those kinds of concepts. It is sometimes difficult to not be completely clear about whether or not you are being the passive aggressive one also. Sometimes just even being aware of that kind of behavior might have you reflecting on your own behavior sometimes, and you think to yourself, am I projecting something that is causing this, right? And sometimes you have to sort of dig down on that too. And that's one of the stages that you go through when you start experiencing, when you start becoming aware that this is the person that you're reporting to. Is it me? Can I do this differently? And then you realize, I see what's happening. We already talked about incompetence. That's an easy one. That's sometimes a person is promoted to a level that is past their level of experience or knowledge. And this can happen for a variety of other reasons that are unrelated to experience and knowledge. And then my personal favorite is the narcissist.
Well, you wrote a whole paper on that.
I did. It was. And I had a really good time with that paper because there are a lot of layers to that too. I mean, there's where is charisma? Where is hubris? Where are the positive qualities to a strong personality in that position? And where does it cross the line into debilitating the team or preventing goals from happening?
I'm curious, Cheryl, why is narcissistic leadership your favorite?
It is my favorite because it is a complex diagnosis that also includes Machiavellianism and psychopathy. This is the dark triad, as they say, and they are three distinctly different sets of behaviors, but they overlap. And I think everyone's got a little bit of all of it. And
I'm twirling my inner mustache here. Can you give us just a little bit of a descriptor of this evil triad?
Sure. It is not uncommon with leaders who are promoted to a position because they have been validated in their traits, their knowledge, their experience. And oftentimes leaders or people who exhibit these behaviors are promoted beyond the nice guy. This is not a pretend kind of thing. It does happen, especially in industries where the stakes are very high and very, very difficult decisions have to be made. And it's not always along the most moral or community-driven decision-making factors. So are you looking for examples, Ben?
Well, I was curious if you could just, for my own sake, if no one else's,
Sure.
define what those three legs of the Machiavellian stool or the evil triad stool might be. I feel like there's a good thing in here somewhere, like the evil stool, or it'll come to me later. But I feel like we have our psychological safety beanbag, and we have tire fires, and we have now like the evil Maleficent stool,
Right.
whatever that
Right.
is.
So
It'll come.
So because there are three sets of behaviors, sets in the dark triad, we'll stick with narcissism for now. And what is the stumbling block with narcissism in an environment is that a narcissist is the last person in the room who will classify themselves in this category. So this is the dangerous part of dealing with a narcissist. They can be absolutely driven and purpose oriented, but they will flex the least when it comes to other ideas, other pathways, and other innovations that are not their own. And this is what makes them especially dangerous because they have no self-awareness in that direction of improvement.
And there's the narcissistic component, and then there's the Machiavellian component and the psychopathy. How do you pronounce that? What are those second two? How do they manifest?
So the Machiavellianism is this desire to lead and take control of the situation at all costs. And there's a number of potential experiences that lead a person to be in this mindset.
And is that different from authoritarian?
It's a great question. How would that be different? Rich, do you?
Machiavelli he was an authoritarian, right? I mean, I think that's
He was.
kind of the definition of, you're ruling with an iron.
He was.
Type of, it's my way or the highway.
He was deeply driven by revenge, though. And this is another dark aspect to it. This was through a series of events. He was on the receiving end of a lot of hurts and disappointments. And in literature and in life,
translates to
there was a massive lifelong plan to position things in just such a way that he would achieve the ultimate revenge. So there's that.
Okay. So there's that. And then psychopathy, psychopathy.
Psychopathy. We'll have to edit a lot of this, Rich. This one's going to take a long time.
No, we're good. So psychopaths. That's what
Right.
That's what
Right.
we're talking about here, right? On this triad, we're talking about those people that can be classified with, that designation being somewhat psychopath.
Sure. Again, unpredictable, unreliable, erratic in their decision making, not a person that you can depend on, defensive, angry. Again, that unpredictable, you never know what you're getting when they get to work.
Yeah. The National Institutes of Health describes it as being deficient in emotional responses, lack of empathy, and poor behavioral controls, resulting in persistent antisocial deviance and sometimes criminal behavior.
Yep.
And sometimes what?
We're talking about just very little emotional intelligence, let's put it that way.
And conscientiousness. I mean,
And very low conscientiousness.
Yeah.
Which is interesting because if you look at some of the big five personality traits, right? That extroversion and high conscientiousness tend to be some of those traits that are associated with good leaders, right?
Uh-huh.
But when you're driven, does that conscientiousness that actually tends to go down, and it's really more that extrovertive nature that helps to some people to move forward, but we need to know when to tone that down and let other people
right.
let other people on the psychological safety beanbag.
Right.
Share it.
Right.
Okay, cool. Thank you for that diversion there. It was very helpful for me. If I can just recap so that it's in my little head, we've got 5 types of negative behavior traits that we've been talking about. There's that authoritarian, there's the micromanager, there's someone who's just completely incompetent, there are people who are passive aggressive and narcissistic.
Right.
And then we also talked a little bit about this dark triad or evil triad of narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy. All of these are bad things.
Right.
All of these are traits that you would never wish you had to work under as a staff member, as a colleague, as an employee, those kinds of things. So do I have that about right in terms of setting the stage for negative traits that we're exploring here?
You do have it right. I would
Brilliant.
be careful about using the word evil, only in that the dark triad is not necessarily evil. I know that you probably did that for a little extra color, but that's a very distinctly different meaning when you bring ego into the equation.
Okay, fair enough. Okay, so we'll keep it at dark triad.
Yeah. Well, let's take a station break here for just a few, and when we come back, we'll start talking a little bit more. Well, we'll continue our discussion on negative leadership and some of the effects of it, and then we'll also talk about some ways to overcome that and make things a more harmonious workplace. We'll be right back.
For Fortune 100 companies and small businesses alike, Harborside Strategy helps design and implement customized precision change management initiatives. From new organizational structures to new processes to new systems, we help you clarify the reason and urgency around your change in language that will resonate across your organization. With that clarity and a common purpose, we use the power of stories and blended communication methods to reinforce your goals and keep everyone focused and aligned. All of it tailored to your people, your organization, your needs. Contact Principal Ben Kleinman today to learn more at www.harborsidestrategy.com. Again, that is www.harborsidestrategy.com.
And we're back. All right. Well, so we were just talking about some of the different types of negative leadership. And it's interesting because we had talked about doing this episode, and then McKinsey and Company put out this report, the Horrible Bosses, The Devil Wears Prada. This just came out the other day in their newsletter, and it really talks about some of these things where these leaders who set unreasonable expectations, display favoritism, steal credit, use inappropriate language, discriminate, all of these things that happen with all of the different types of negative leaders that we were just talking about, right? It's very interesting that this is part of the kind of the national conversation, right? So, and Cheryl was just showing us, some of those different types of leaders. What are some of the effects that these negative leaders have on the organization in general, and particularly within change or organizational development situations?
I think some of the more obvious ones are retention. People are not going to put up with a leader that makes them feel diminished or less important in the structure. It can lead to all sorts of health issues, distress, disengagement, lack of creativity, even a person's own drive to be conscientious or to get things done can be diminished or damaged. And those are some of the less impactful ones. There are even, more traumatic impacts from leaders that exhibit some of these traits. There could be harassment. I think, remember, Rich, in the last company that you worked for, there was some examples of situations that were challenging.
Oh, challenging is one way of putting it, yes. But yeah, and it's not just that's one place, but there've certainly been other throughout my career dealing with whether I'm in a full-time situation or whether I'm working as a consultant coming in, where you experience some of this toxicity that can happen within the workplace. So, how about you, Ben?
Yeah, I've seen it where in many cases you have the ultimate outcome is that teams don't gel or people don't work well together, and that impacts the work product. And so you're not getting good work done. You're not producing things that are high quality as an organization or as a team or as a smaller group of people. You're not getting things done on time. Projects tend to go sideways faster. People don't care, and so they don't bring themselves to work, or they feel like no matter what they do, they're always going to get the stink eye from the boss. And so or their colleagues who are evincing some of these negative traits. And so it seems like it just ultimately, like Cheryl was saying, it impacts morale and retention, but it also impacts the work that is being done by the company, and that can manifest itself. And then you wind up losing internal staff. People go elsewhere, and oftentimes it means you wind up losing customers because your products or your services are subpar, or they don't meet the needs of what your audience is demanding. Sure. And so it can have, in the longer term, it can have very, very dramatic effects on your company. And I find that what's helpful is we start to think about how we grapple with some of these types of leadership styles that are not very helpful, and where people are not behaving in ways that we would like them to, and where we start to think about how do we right the ship. I think it's been more helpful, those companies that identify it and call it out in a private way or in a public way, depending on the nature of the relationship and the situation, and try to help that leader change styles, help that leader become a little bit more self-aware, like you were talking about, Cheryl, that sort of self-awareness in many of these bad leadership styles sometimes is missing. Sometimes it's missing intentionally, and sometimes it's just not, because someone was never clued into how to think that way. And so in cases where I've seen it turn well, you have leaders given opportunities for coaching. And Rich, I know you've talked a lot about coaching on prior shows. There's opportunities for coaching and self-reflection in a very safe way, and kind of meeting that person where they are. So you're going to talk to someone you're going to help someone who's new to a job, who's incompetent, in a way that's very different from someone who's narcissistic and who's been in role for dozens of years, right? You're going to have different kinds of conversations, but the ultimate goal is to help them become a wiser, more self-aware, more organizationally aware type of leader. So that's something I've seen work pretty well. Other times it's a little bit of the reverse of that, where you have enough colleagues, team members, staff members, underlings essentially voicing discontent. You see where people are just leaving in droves, and senior management can kind of say, well, there's something going on there. We should look into that. Or enough people, if it's bad enough, Cheryl, you were talking about harassment, enough people file enough complaints with HR that eventually the company kind of has to do something, because it becomes a little bit of a legal risk. So there's all those kinds of things as well. You just hope it never comes to that.
Yep, for sure. And all that tracks with, Gallup every year puts out this State of the Global Workplace report. And in the latest one, I think it's last year and this year's, 70% of team engagement is attributable to the relationship with the manager, how the manager treats other people, right? So they say that it's, the manager's the linchpin of engagement. When you have somebody who is in any of those, those kind of, toxic, or I don't want to say laissez-faire, because sometimes that can work, but right. Disengaged leader, right? When you're in that mode, creativity is going to go down, innovation is going to go down. People don't want to work there. All those things that business leaders have been saying they're afraid of for from the past couple of years to what they're worried about in the future, with high turnover and having to keep that trying to reduce the churn, right? That all comes down to having managers. And to your effect, or to what you were saying there, Ben, Gallup even puts out here that those who undergo leadership training, who are coached and have some kind of a program where they can recognize what's happening and they can change their behaviors, rather than just nixing them and replacing them, which can be expensive and loss of a lot of institutional knowledge, right? When you can actually invest in your people to get that done, you tend to boost what they have, the 2% higher engagement, just by training the managers, right? So just a lot to be said for that, I suppose.
That's amazing.
And you're talking about something, especially with a leader who may be incompetent, let's just say that category, if there is a system of trust with those team members, and it's a risk, but to go to someone who you're reporting to suggest additional resources or provide constructive feedback, that is something that when it goes really well can bring people closer and more harmony working together. Or depending on where that leader is on any of these spectrums, it could turn into a very terrible conversation,
For sure.
defensive and angry. And then you're, ruminating on that all day and night. What am I walking?
Now, I will say, well, and I will say a study was done, it was just released last month sometime, where, one of the questions is how do leaders become bad leaders, right? And so there's some trait elements to that, but in a meta-analysis, big contributing factor is how people on the job, how the subordinates too, right? So there is some level of training and coaching that can and should happen on the worker side too, right? Because when you have, and I'm thinking about some teachers that have abandoned their posts, they don't want to do this anymore because their students were unruly, right? When you have employees that are not more than just disengaged, but they are exhibiting counterproductive work behavior, CWBs, right? When they're doing that, and the leader's just I can't do this anymore, or whatever, or the only way that I can rein them in is through becoming, this Machiavellian
or
figure,
very
right?
authoritative or micromanagey. Yeah. Have
right.
you seen it work well where there are some kinds of codes of conduct or shared responsibilities or a set of basic expectations? I wonder what you guys have seen, because a lot of times I'll see it where companies have some sort of personal handbook, or when people join the company as an employee or as a leader, whatever, you're expected to sign that you've read the handbook and policies and all the kind of usual stuff about following the law and not harassing people and those kinds of things, but also having some shared expectation of how you will behave at work, how you will treat your colleagues, how you will treat staff if you're a manager, or how you will treat other people around you if you're not a manager. And sometimes those just can help level set and give people a little bit of that backstop to say, hey, I noticed something's been kind of happening. Your stuff is late, or you've been reacting a little bit weird in some of our last meetings. Is everything okay? This is not how we behave in this organization. We really try to not behave like that. And sometimes it can. I'm just curious if you've seen that work well in other companies, or in companies where it's been that smoldering tire fire for years. Is it because they don't have that shared set of expectations?
That's a good question, Ben, and we're going to come right back and answer that after this short.
That's a lot.
Stay tuned. That's a lot, yeah. So we'll be right back.
Are you struggling with high employee turnover, low morale, or poor communication within your team? Do you find it challenging to foster collaboration and trust among your employees? Do you have resistance to some of the recent changes you've made in your business? You're not alone. According to sources such as Forbes and the Society for Human Resources Management, many business owners face these same challenges. They know that success comes from a strong workplace culture, but they don't always know where to start. If this sounds like you, it's time to take action. Our experienced consultants stand ready to work with you to develop customized solutions. Don't wait any longer. Take our quick culture scorecard today and discover where you can improve. Work Balance Consulting, where workplace culture meets success. Visit our website at www.workbalanceconsulting.com/scorecard and start your journey toward a better workplace today. Again, visit www.workbalanceconsulting.com/scorecard.
And we're back. All right, Ben, you asked for it. So
Bring it. I want to hear it.
yeah. So we're back, and Ben was just asking, like, does it help? Let me just see if I get this right. Does it help when there are policies and there are mechanisms in place to kind of how do we want
To rely on when things get murky or ambiguous
yeah
or tense.
Yeah, some kind of shared set of expectations. And I think it works best when it's written. It's part of the corporate culture, it's part of the corporate DNA, but it's best when it's written, in my experience. And I'm really curious what you guys have seen or what you've studied in the literature.
Right. There are so many layers to what you're talking about. Culture is one, first of all. First, right off the bat, the culture in a company, which is supposed to be known or understood probably best by the people who are doing the hiring, right? They're going through candidates to see about who will fit into this culture, right? And a candidate that's done their homework will also know about that culture a little bit. And then there's a difference between reputation and culture. And sometimes it's the same thing and sometimes they're not.
sure
Then you have HR, right? You have your human resources.
Right.
A lot of their purpose is to deal with those sticky conversations, right? Those tricky conversations that the manager doesn't necessarily want to have with that employee, right? Then there is codes of conduct, the writing, the manual. That is something that every company that has one has to manage a process where everyone signs it, and that signature is that they've read it. Terms and agreements, we all check that box, but you really, it is
That most of us never actually read.
most of us never actually read it. So
just go to the back and sign it.
right, and it's like you were saying, Ben. They are fail safes. They're stopgaps. It's you go to that. You start looking for that page when there's a problem, right? And then and then performance evaluations, right? That is another, we're just gonna chalk that up for the annual review, and this will come out of their paycheck, and that's how we're gonna deal with that, right?
Which I'm sorry to cut in. I feel like that's another show in and of itself. Is this annual performance review, which I think is absolutely garbage.
Right.
And the research would definitely support your garbage theory there.
Yeah. Which goes back to the whole,
Okay, so Cheryl, I'm sorry.
no, that goes back to the whole reward model.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of things that you're talking about there. There's the culture that you're walking into. There's the culture that there's an expectation there. Now there is a history of larger companies that have been around for years and years. There's an expectation there that culture.
And some of that is expectations. You walk into a company that's been around for 50 or 100 years, and there's probably a different set of expectations than a company that's been around for 5 years,
right,
10
right.
years.
And a system,
different industries have different expectations.
Right.
But I feel like sometimes that culture is so unwritten and is enforced in just the day-to-day interactions that people have casually, semi-formally, formally, but it's not quite the same as having something that's a shared understanding that everyone is essentially signed off on.
Right. Right.
And I'm just curious if you've seen that as well, or that's just been observational on my part.
No, I think when you have organizations, companies, nonprofits, whatever it is, that are very purpose-driven, they have taken the time to have the executives set a vision, share the vision, develop a team of influencers, right, that can help to communicate that vision across the entire organization. I mean, like now I'm kind of going through like Cotter's steps, right? But it makes sense, right? When you have that and it becomes culturally ingrained, it does work. And I've seen this with, I think I mentioned EOS before, the Entrepreneur Operating System by Mark Winters and Gino Wickman, where it is a business operating system, right? It's a way that the business sets its strategic objectives and really communicates that across the whole board. Though that does tend to bring about a culture where you're fostering leadership among the rest of the team, right? There's a sense of shared leadership. So it's not a pipe dream. I mean, I've seen it actually work very well in some other organizations, but it has to be very intentional.
I've seen it work too, Rich, and Ben. It can save time and money. I mean, policies are often in these handbooks. At Morgan Stanley, the policies around expense reimbursement. Rather than have a whole team of people argue with you about that shirt you ruined at the Xerox machine, it says in there the limit to damage to your clothing, for example. There's, the policies do work when they're in there.
When needed.
Yeah.
And just to liven it up for a moment, Rich, I wanted to commend you for going about 35 minutes without introducing our first acronym.
I did bring an acronym. All right.
But Rich, you brought it first today, so Cheryl, you got to get on the stick next time.
Get on the stick. I was desperately trying to arrange the categories of bad leaders in a way that made a word before we got on today, but it didn't happen. That could be a game.
That could be your next book.
Yes.
Is a whole acronym theory of bad leadership.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I am working on the dark triad compared to light triads. That is an idea that has been bumping around for a while.
I like it.
Yeah, thank you.
I like it.
Your list there could be an acronym. I'm not very good at anagrams, so
MIPIN? Yeah, I think we'd have to.
a MIPIN.
MIPAIN?
I like that. Did you see is pain in there somewhere?
No,
yeah.
M-pain or
M-pain?
Now it's mnemonic. Ow.
Yeah.
pains.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
Well, I think this is all really, really helpful stuff for me. And it's been really interesting to dig into some of these bad styles, or I should say, less wise or less helpful behavior traits and leadership styles that don't bring out the best in people, and start to think about ways that we can work through them, help people work through them, help leaders become better leaders, things like that. I think that ultimately is sort of where we leave things, is that you need to have policies or some kind of shared set of expectations. You need to have some of those kinds of cultural things in place. And ultimately, that's stuff that builds up over time. Rich, it looks like you were about to jump in.
Yeah. Well, if I can add one more element to this.
Oh, of course. Yeah.
On the documenting policies and so documentation, communication, that element that can help overcoming, some of these negative leadership qualities, right? And really coming down to focusing people on those positive work behaviors, right? Goal setting theory, we've mentioned this before, right? But goal setting theory, Locke and Latham, so setting these, here's another acronym, those SMART goals, right? Specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time constraint, right? When you can actually help your people to set their short-term, long-term goals that have those elements to it, they're motivated to overcome challenges, especially when they're writing it down. It has to be done at a certain time. They're involved in the decision-making process on that. So that's kind of shared decision-making.
Mm-hmm. It comes back to something we've talked about before, is co-creation.
Co-creation, right. Yeah.
right.
And that's one of the elements of that EOS system, is that they build rocks. Rocks are those goals that they're kind of tethered to, I'm not really crazy about
the connotation there.
the connotation there, but it feels like you're sinking. But
Is there a chain? There's no chain. Oh,
right.
Okay, so we're in Chicago. Rich and I are based in Chicago. Cheryl's East Coast, Philly, sort of New York area. And you have to be thinking about cement shoes and all the like not cool sinking feelings that people might have gotten back in the day.
you have to be. You have to be. But Rich, I do want to say
This is not gangster.
it's not gangsta. No. I do want to say that to the point of having things written and the smart goal setting theories, things of this nature, in defense of good leaders everywhere, there is always that risk that when you are pushing your team or challenging your team to the next level, and any number of these behavior traits may suddenly be put on the table by your team, right? Oh, well, So one of the ways that as a team member or an employee reporting to someone who is causing you stress, you do have to look at yourself and your own goals, your own skills, your own experience, your own, what you're bringing to the job that is making things as difficult or easy as they are or not. And part of that personal resiliency is one of the things that no matter what kind of leader you have, you need to be aware of this skill set of your own.
Sure.
And as every single episode that we always have to talk about communication too, right? It is the one thing, which maybe we didn't get up to yet. Maybe this is the big reveal. It continues to be the one most important thing. You need to communicate in a safe space when things are more than you think you can manage. And then if you have that opportunity to communicate that, and you have the courage and the skills and the time to communicate, then perhaps these things that you are dealing with and the challenges that are making you feel like you can't do your job can be addressed, can be alleviated, can be improved. Maybe you'll get more resources. Maybe you'll be put on a different project. Any number of things can happen if you do that communication and often get into that transparency with your team and your leaders. Goes along.
The crystal clear communication.
It's always important, isn't it?
It's there. Yep. That's it.
One of the things that we haven't mentioned today explicitly is this idea of incentives and how people are incented, how behaviors are incented, how outcomes are incented. A lot of times companies may only care about the outcome and not so much the behavior that gets to that outcome. And I think in the last, 10, 15, 20 years, we've started to see a shift, at least in the US, in terms of leadership styles, management styles, trying to bring in a little bit of not just, we want you to get to here, but we also want you to get to there in a way that is not Machiavellian or incompetent or passive aggressive or narcissistic, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that, I think, maybe is a topic for another day, but this idea that incentives play a part in all of these types of behaviors that may or may not be desirable.
Yeah, the ends justifies the means is no longer a acceptable answer to some of these pathways. And also with the advent of things like Glassdoor, maybe there's others, but I know Glassdoor is a very Reddit, probably open forum where, hey, you think you're going to work here? This is the real deal, the culture, right? I mean, there is a whole new layer of transparency where, companies are being outed for stuff they're hiding.
For sure. Yep. All right, folks. Well, we're about at time here today. And so somebody want to give us a brief recap? We have, all right, so what we've discussed. I'll start. And
good luck.
So the first thing we talked about, it's been dense. It's a dense episode here, right? So the first part is we talked about what is bad leadership, right? What are those elements? And Cheryl brought up 5 different types of bad leadership.
And coined a new acronym, M-PAIN. That's our new book right there.
M-PAIN, right?
M-PAIN. M-PAIN, U-PAIN.
And then we have, in our second part, we talked about some of the effects of bad leadership, right? And what that can do to organizations and the people that work there. And then in the last part, we discuss a little bit about how we can overcome that and work around that. Does that seem pretty fair?
Brilliant.
Excellent.
Well done, sir.
All right. Well, with that, folks, thank you very much for joining us. We will see you on our next episode. Thanks for tuning into Harmonious Workplaces. See you soon.
Thanks, everyone. Bye, guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care. Thanks for listening to Harmonious Workplaces. You can find Harmonious Workplaces on LinkedIn, Twitter, YouTube, Spotify, Amazon, Apple, and other streaming platforms. We'd love any feedback on whatever channel you find us on. Please rate, like, and share our podcast with your network, and remember to add Harmonious Workplaces to your list of favorites to get notified about each new episode. To contact Rich or Cheryl, please visit www.workbalanceconsulting.com. To connect with Ben, find him on LinkedIn or visit at www.harborsidestrategy.com.